I'm not just writing history, I'm making it.
I have the brain of a historian and the clapback of a comedian.
You better come with sources because I always check footnotes.
Hello, I'm Casey Callahan, and I'm with the historians on Housewives today, bringing you our first inaugural episode, the Historians on Housewives podcast, which functions at the intersection of history and Bravo to build a community between scholars and fans of the Bravo shows by discussing the historical context that shape the experiences of the Bravo celebrities, the episodes, and the series arcs that we've come to love.
Hi, I'm Jessica Millward, Dr. J. Mill, the Millionairess. I'm very happy to be here and have you here with us on our first inaugural podcast.
And Max Spear, just Max. I don't have all those nicknames. Not yet. And yes, welcome to Historians on Housewives.
So I would love for us to introduce ourselves to you and share with you how we got to Bravo and what it is that we work on before launching into our very first episode.
They're all looking at me, so I guess it's me. So I took a job at the University of California, Irvine, at the same time that the Orange County Housewives was starting their season, their series. I said, here I find myself in Orange County. Let's see what these women are talking about so I can understand this place where I have landed. My everyday life looks nothing like the Orange County Housewives, and I feel very cheated. Nonetheless, I was hooked, so I started watching other Bravo shows. In terms of my day job, I teach classes on slavery, U.S. history, and Black women's history, all of which are very heavy subjects. So I like turning to Bravo to let my mind do something else. Little did I know I would be haunted, teased, intrigued by some of the storylines and how it relates to American history.
I had a really interesting route to Bravo and a career as a historian. I lived with 3 guys in college, and it was really interesting because one of them was always watching ETV and Bravo, and that's kind of my first introduction. And I feel like I came in a few seasons into Orange County because I remember meeting Gretchen Rossi first, thinking, this woman is very blonde and they're having a tanning party. What is happening? And as I went through college, I realized that one of my dearest friends ended up moving from working at NBC to working for the Bravo side of NBC. And then I felt like watching Bravo was just, part of good friend duty. And as I got in to graduate school, Bravo really became an outlet as a space to do something that wasn't working and reading all the time. So it's become my addiction. And I teach classes on women's history, African American history, U.S. surveys more broadly. And I study feminism and social movements and conservative women's activism in the 20th century.
I probably have the most boring story of the 3 of us in terms of coming to the Housewives. I was born in Orange County. I remember in 2008 when I started seeing places I knew on primetime television, and there were these very eccentric, loud women who were taking us behind the gates, which was both new and extremely familiar for me, watching television as a young man, I guess, embarking on grad school for the first time. And like both of you, I did not come to, I came to the Housewives because I needed an outlet for my work, which is on the early American carceral state in colonial New York. And I've been hooked ever since. ever since the first woohoo, Vicky. And when I met Casey in graduate school, I immediately was like, oh, you like Housewives as well? Like, we're going to be together for a while because this is my
Yeah, we can't agree on
yeah.
music or just about anything else, but Bravo Television is a constant.
Yeah, Housewives forever. Today, we're delving into the history informing Southern Charm. If you're not familiar with the show, Southern Charm follows the day-to-day lives of young elite socialites with deep roots to Charleston, South Carolina.
And when we say elite and deep roots, we mean deep roots dating back to the founding of the South Carolina colony.
I'm Thomas Ravenel, and I'm from Charleston, South Carolina. My family came here in the 1680s, and we've been a presence here ever since. I live in the South of Broad section of Charleston. It's probably one of the wealthiest neighborhoods per capita in the country.
In 2007, Ravenel was indicted on federal charges of conspiracy to distribute cocaine, and Don Ledwell alleges that he sexually assaulted her. Bravo cut Ravenel from the show in 2018, however, and his former girlfriend and mother of his children, Catherine Dennis, remains on the show.
She's pretty good looking. She's a scion of two of the most powerful political families of South Carolina.
And Catherine Dennis is the several great-granddaughter of John C. Calhoun. Yes, that John C. Calhoun, former Vice President of the United States, former Senator of South Carolina, and one of the main people leading the charge for the South to leave the Union and hastened the Civil War.
I definitely have a kindergarten crush on Catherine right now.
I think she's really sweet.
I've never hooked up with anyone with purple hair before, and I'm kind of interested.
Now, does she live here?
She lives on her family's plantation, I think.
Well, that means if you marry her, someday that would be your plantation.
Married? Oh, good. So we're talking about marriage now.
That exchange between two of the show's protagonists, Craig and Cameron, about sums up what you need to know about Southern Charm. It's power and privilege. It's Southern white masculinity and femininity, and the legacies of slavery in South Carolina are on display.
I feel like this particular exchange that's happening between Craig and Cameron is just making my head go like bing, thinking of Stephanie Jones Rogers' new book about slaveholding mistresses, right? And you know, just the amount of power that white women, you know, wealthy white women could have in the South in a place like Charleston, South Carolina.
Excellent point. I think that many times we have this kind of romantic view, not we in this room, but America writ large has this romantic view of what slavery looked like. It was encapsulated in Gone with the Wind, and it was something from a different era. But for those of us who study slavery, we know that power dynamics were present in every single exchange. So I would agree with you about that. Thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Well, and I feel like as you watch the show, it's this constant push-pull between the men and the women on the show, really, in terms of who's in charge and who has kind of the power within these dynamics. And it's interesting the ways in which certain cast members come in and out of the spotlight. And it is interesting that there's Craig Conover, who is a part of that exchange with Cameron. He's actually from New York, so he is relocated to the South. And it's interesting how many times he's kind of at the bottom of the pile, so to speak, in a way that some of the other cast members aren't, who have been rooted in Charleston for generations.
We'll go to an easy one first, which is no yelling. The question is, do you break the rule, and does your partner break this rule? Ready? 1, 2, 3. So, oh, okay. So you think you both break the rule, and Craig was giving you a pass on that. So you don't feel that she ever yells in the relationship?
No, but her definition of yelling is so skewed, it's not even funny. She's like, stop yelling. And I'm like, I was talking in this volume, but it was stern.
If your voice is not an inside voice, you're yelling.
Right.
And it's aggressive, I don't like it. And his excuse was that he was from the North, and that's how they talk.
It is how we talk. We're louder people.
Being from the North doesn't give you an excuse to be an asshole.
They treat him like a carpetbagger. I don't know if I could say that, but
I think you can.
They would say that.
They would say that. For those of you that don't know the history of the southern United States, the carpetbaggers came down after the Civil War and were selling, particularly free people, promises and really broken dreams. They were basically taking advantage of the South's economy had collapsed. To that point, I feel like I need to stop and go back. One of the things that we didn't mention is most of the cast members are actually descended from major slaveholders from South Carolina. So when Casey talks about the push and the pull between masculinity and femininity, there's also a kind of a ghost haunting the script, and that's how did these people come into their wealth? What kind of issues can we see that echo from 2019 that reach all the way back into the 19th century? So it's very interesting. You don't see Black people on the show, but you can see the presence of enslaved life, or really kind of the mindset of slavery or pro-white ideology, if you will. Is that too strong?
Well, no. And this is the other fascinating thing, is that even if on some level they would consider Craig to some extent as a carpetbagger, consciously or unconsciously, Craig is also really vocal in the season that Thomas runs and doesn't win his race for state senate, that Craig goes to cast a ballot for Thomas Ravenel because he goes, well, we're really different except for politically, because politically we're like the same person, right? So it's this interesting moment, right, where he's both so different because he's not from Charleston, but he's holding on to very similar, if not identical, political values, even though I'm not so sure how much any of them necessarily interrogate what that means. Perhaps Thomas and his father do more than others, because they've had some choice moments on the show, like the clip we're going to play right here.
But before that, it's time for the Bonko Party.
So our Bonko Party is our game section because we like to have fun and play games. So today, this is kind of, I think about this as, I'm thinking of this as like my all-stars. Not quite a would you rather, but, there are these broad questions. I'm going to put you on the spot, and hopefully you have an answer for me. So for our first question, and feel free to play along in your car or wherever you are listening to the podcast, if you could pick one housewife or other Bravo celebrity to guest lecture for you, who would you pick and why?
That one's easy. Hands down, Michael Rappaport, the Bravo celebrity we all want to be. He gets to sit on the stage with Andy. He gets to read the Housewives for their own filth. He gets to have a back and forth with Kenya Moore. I think if he came into the classroom, he'd be both personable and able to break down these hard concepts that we see on the Housewives. So without a shadow of a doubt, Michael Rappaport.
And do you think you would give him a specific lecture topic? Like, what would his theme be for the class?
I think he would be able to handle toxic masculinity, and he'd be able to read some of the men on the show in a particular interesting light. I mean, he's an equal opportunist reader, if you will.
That's amazing. I would so be there for a class where Michael Rappaport talks to us about toxic masculinity.
So when we reach out to Michael Rappaport's people, I'm just saying that, perhaps. The wish list.
Hi, Michael, call me. I'm going to backtrack this. It would be a class that was designed to teach students to research. So they would be going to local archives, maybe writing like one research paper. And the housewife that I would want is Sonia Morgan, because she is really passionate
about the Morgan letters.
Yeah, about the Morgan letters.
Do not touch the Morgan letters.
Yeah, I will play that clip in here.
She took you today to the Morgan house because that was like a peace, like a peace treaty.
I said, look at these antiques. And Dorinda put her paws all over these letters. You go in that house, you don't touch those letters. You don't touch the Morgan letters. I'm sorry you feel so upset. Okay. All right, Sonia.
But I feel like she could probably give you some good tips on things not to do at an archive.
That too.
But likewise, I think that because we are all historians, since Max brought it up, he could actually talk to her about the archival process and what is selected for preservation. Remember when they went to the Morgan house, there were a range of things, but she wasn't necessarily happy with everything. However, she was very clear, do not touch the Morgan letters.
Well, and there's been other episodes where people have come and taken treasured Morgan family objects out of her New York City townhome for preservation, right, to move into that museum and other locations. So she probably would have a lot to say on restoration and what this looks like behind the scenes.
And she would look fabulous doing it.
Absolutely, without question.
Yeah. Okay, my pick. I feel like it might be a little controversial. I don't think we necessarily spend enough time with students or even our peers talking about how we're actually going to get things done and plan out our lives and our time and still find work-life balance. So I want to guest lecture from Teddy Mellencamp, our accountability coach. And I feel like Teddy Mellencamp needs to come in and talk to us about how to realistically schedule our time so that we make it to work. We have time with our families, but we've still finished our assignments and gotten things done on time. And I do think it's a life skill that's hard to teach. It's hard to learn. I don't think a lot of students come into college having a good concept of how to allot time, or even how to keep a life balance. And I think it's something that faculty members and graduate students really struggle with too.
But how would that work? What happens if she comes into your class and suddenly she engages in mean girl culture? What happens if she's trying to teach what she's born to do, but maybe there's a little Kyle personality in the class that she bonds with? How would you regulate that? Or would you just let her go at it?
With students?
Yeah, I mean, why not?
I see two different Teddys. I see like potentially mean girl Teddy when she's with Kyle, but I feel like work Teddy, where she's creating this huge empire of accountability coaching, is I mean, it seems like she's consulting people for a lot more than just how to lose weight or get fit, right? And so it does seem to me that she does have some sort of platform for how to think differently about your time management.
At the very least, she could give us a pep talk. I could always use a pep talk.
Yeah, at least it's a motivational speech for you can get through this semester.
Right, that day when you're just in footnotes and editing, you can do this.
Yeah.
Can I?
One step at a time, I think, as Teddy Mellencamp would say.
Why are you calling me right now, Teddy? I'm in the middle of footnoting.
Yeah, she'd be checking in on your accountability.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think it's a controversial pick, but I do think it's an important skill.
No, I can support you on that pick. Yes, I will just support you on that pick.
I mean, there's other housewives that I feel like would be great at that too, but but since Teddy has her own business, I feel like maybe she has some different tips and tricks. Okay. Ready for your next question?
I think so.
Me too.
What combination of 3 housewives or other Bravo celebrities would make for the most exciting coffee date? So if you could have coffee, you're just handpicking your 3 housewives or Bravo celebrities. What would that combination look like as you sit at a table for 4?
I would invite Camille Grammer just so I can hear her talk about the morally corrupt Faye Resnick. I would also want to hear about Camille's views on, kind of Kelsey's life since they are no longer together. I'd like to hear her triumphant story of remarrying someone. So I would like to hear from Camille Grammer. I don't know. I wonder if she and Luann would kind of be, Luann from New York, I wonder if that would be more about coffee being thrown on one another and less about a coffee conversation. So my number 1 pick would be Camille. Maybe it just needs to be me and her. Who would you have, Max?
I mean, my go-to would be Dorinda from New York Housewives. Because she's all elbows. When she gets into a story, she really gets into the story. Okay. She punches it. I wouldn't want to have the same sort of discussion about her views on particular things. Like Camille Grammer, I think, would be an excellent person to talk to with regard to like Kelsey Grammer and his, at least what she has revealed on the show regarding his sexuality. Discussions about like what's considered to be homosexual now, what's heterosexual, right? How he presents himself. She would be a fascinating study. I mean, Dorinda would be great for talking about politics, probably. Talking about, and I'm really a fan of her elbows.
And her elbows.
That scene where she was screaming, clip, 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 was iconic. I would like to have a front row seat at a coffee shop to that.
I think that Kenya Moore, as much as she can be a lightning rod, I think she would also be perfect having a coffee conversation for that reason, is because she doesn't necessarily get her elbows in there. She gets her feet, her toes. She gets in there, and she's going to, give you the tea. And I also think that she is very, she can talk her way out of anything.
And she'll twirl.
She will twirl. So, it will be a day that will be gone with the wind fabulous. So I think that would be worth the $2 for coffee, right?
Yeah. Probably, keeping with the Housewives of Atlanta, probably Candy be really interesting.
Well, that's when I'm going to be nosy. So I probably would go with Candy too. Do you think she would, given that she has a nighttime show, Candy Cuddled Nights, and she has a sex toy line, do you think that she would put up parameters about what we can discuss? Because I have questions.
I have a lot of questions. I wonder, I just need to ask her about TLC. I could stay away from talking about sexuality if that's like...
The sex dungeon. You want to talk about TLC.
Yeah, I want to talk about how she... I would immediately get into the financials. How much did you make for Scrubs? What was that like? Right. To hear that every day for years, decades even. It would become really... and maybe she wouldn't want to talk about that. That might be off-brand for Candy, too. But the sex dungeon would definitely be hot.
The sex dungeon would be interesting. Now, see, I like Candy for her business acumen and really how she handles some of the women and how she handles her mother, right? I think she gets a medal for handling her own mother. But I have to be honest, if I had to have coffee with Candy, I might want to venture into her friend zone and ask Tiny Harris if she would join. Then we could talk about TLC, but maybe Tiny will bring the kids with her so we could see like Major or Eris Harris or of course T.I. But Candy would be good.
Candy would be really good. What would be a third person, you think?
Let's see. I got Sonia. I've got Kenya. Tiny doesn't count?
No, Tiny totally counts because they did the Candy special.
Yes, Tiny counts.
Yeah, Tiny definitely counts.
Did you pick a third?
I didn't pick a third. I haven't gotten that far yet.
Would you bring a house bro? Should we bring a house bro instead of a housewife?
Who do you think? Maurice? Or no?
Maurizio.
Let
me say it differently. Maurizio.
Yeah, Maurizio. I might pick Maurizio. He looked like he was having a really good time in Hawaii.
He did.
Yeah. He seems like he laughs a lot. So, yeah, if I was at coffee and I had to pick a house husband, it'd probably be Maurizio.
I would have to have Cynthia Bailey at my coffee.
Well, yes, I was saving her for happy hour drinks. That wasn't a question, but I was saving her for happy hour drinks.
She is my absolute favorite. Like, I just find her to be just so amazing. So I can't have coffee without Cynthia Bailey. I kind of would be interested in coffee with Brooks. Because I want to get all of the dirt. All of the dirt.
Do you think you could trust what Brooks is saying?
Ooh, I don't know, but I'm sure if Brooks said no, Dawn would say yes.
I'm telling you, Dawn just did a tweet last week. Did you see it? Tell for the listeners. Let's remind them.
I'll pull it up. I'll talk about who Dawn is while I pull this up. Dawn is Vicky's second husband. They're divorced. They divorced because she left him for a guy named Brooks, charming fellow and Vicky if you don't know, is called her nickname for herself until very recently was the OG of the OC, and now she's recently been demoted.
Right, so Vicky was demoted, and there's been this backlash and outcry on Twitter. How could they do this to her? And so there were a lot of tweets going back and forth. But I will say that Dawn receives the best tweet response award. It was a classic.
I feel like my third person, okay, so if I had Cynthia and fingers crossed Brooks, I feel like that would just be so fascinating. I'm kind of leaning toward Dolores Catania as number 3. I was really, really touched by her last season of New Jersey, just watching now multiple seasons of her relationship with her ex-husband that she lives with, and she's trying to get a new life together with a new boyfriend, and her son's growing up and in college, and but she, she's working with charities in New Jersey for battered women and children, and that I found her to have a really kind of an emotional story arc last season, and I feel like it would make for a really interesting coffee to hear about all of those life experiences and how that really kind of shapes her stance on what loyalty looks like, right? Because the New Jersey women are all about their loyalty, right? And I find it
Until they're not.
Until they're not, right? And so it's this interesting, like, how does Dolores stay that loyal in that situation with an ex-husband that ran out on her and did her really wrong? So I don't know. I feel like that might be interesting.
So, Dawn, so for some background on this tweet, Vicky left Dawn after a very long marriage. He adopted her 2 kids from a previous marriage, and they had it was a fairly messy divorce on Bravo that played out on Bravo. And she left him for a guy who goes by the nickname Girth Brooks.
Ew.
Yeah. Ew is right. Ew is right. And Vicky did everything for Brooks. She got his teeth fixed. He lived with her for a very long time. She paid for everything. This all played out on the show. And one of the things that she used to slag Dawn was that she had to pay alimony to him. And I don't know if this is true or not. We're not in the courtroom with them, with the divorce lawyers or anything. So I don't know if that's true or not. But she really dragged him through the mud. And then Brooks was found out to be in the midst of a cancer scam, or at least that's what's alleged. I'm always worried that we're going to get sued, so I just want to say it's at least alleged. But on the show, they're very clear that this was a cancer scam, that Brooks was at the helm of it, and there's still kind of a question mark up in the air about whether or not Vicky knew what she knew, how much she knew, when she knew it. But eventually she left Brooks and started dating a former Anaheim police officer named Steve Loge, who maybe someday we will do a show about Steve Loge and his failed electoral campaign.
Does he pronounce it Loge or Lodge?
Oh, that's a good question.
I feel like it was just Steve Lodge is how he pronounced it.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah.
Okay, Steve Lodge. Apologies.
Could be wrong.
Anyway, so they recently got married in the Bahamas.
No, engaged, I thought.
No, I think they also got, maybe they didn't.
I thought they just got engaged.
So they recently got engaged in the Bahamas, and Dawn's tweet congratulating the happy couple was, "Congratulations to Vicky and Steve. As long as my alimony payments keep coming, I'm thrilled for them both."
Whoa.
Yeah.
See, I didn't realize that was in response to them being engaged. I thought that was in response to her being moved from OG housewife to friend of the cast.
I thought that's what the tweet was about,
I
too.
didn't
No, this tweet, see, this is where citations come in. This tweet was from April 26th.
Interesting.
Oh, so then it was the engagement.
Yeah, it was.
Because I feel like that was the whole push, right? That she was that there was the rumors that she was going to be demoted from the show, and so I felt like there was all those articles about Steve has to propose to her soon, so that she has a story arc, right?
I think Radar Online or one of those outlets posted this tweet as part of like a longer story telling about the downfall of the OG of the OC.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow is right.
Okay.
Wow. So is that your 3?
Last one now. This is the big one. This is why this is the finale question for the games. If Bravo did their own version of MTV's Road Rules, which housewife franchises would you pair in teams together? So we're talking about 2 teams, right? So 2 franchises per team. So really, what are the 4 franchises, right? And how would you pair them?
Does that include season or how many people from a given franchise?
I mean, if you know exactly what season, so you know which cast you're talking about, that's fine. I was kind of thinking the current seasons as they stand, like the current cast.
Yeah. Okay, we could do it that way.
Yeah.
Might date it, but yeah, we could do it that way.
Okay, I thought about this a lot. I know exactly which 2 teams I would pair together. Okay. My dream team would be Atlanta paired with New York. I feel like that is a lot of brains. And I actually feel like both casts would be like very scrappy and competitive as like one ultra team. And I feel like I would love to see them take on the combination of New Jersey and Dallas.
I was going to put New Jersey and Dallas together.
New Jersey and Dallas would be a good one. I think we're all in agreement. New Jersey and Dallas on one side. I don't agree with the other one, but
whoa.
But yeah, New Jersey and Dallas on the other side. I would go with Orange County because they're doing a lot of those rope climbs and like
they didn't do it
courses.
Well.
No, but they have the most practice.
Who would you put with Orange County?
Who would you put with them?
Probably Atlanta. I would agree. They probably have the most. They probably think the quickest on the fly. That's who I would go with.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Atlanta definitely would think the quickest on the fly.
I mean, I feel like Nene would have to be team captain. Like Tamara would have to move over.
Yeah. But Tamara also...
Or that team's not competing.
But Tamara also owns Cut Fitness. Like, I feel
that's
like
true.
They have the training apparatus.
I just don't know if Tamara likes not being top dog, but, like, Nene is top dog.
But is Nene? I mean, support for her is waning. I mean, she had the reunion this past season, which, you know, I felt very sad for her because she's in the middle of something. I feel that, you know, she needs to do a little bit of inward work before she can be a leader. But you definitely want her in the foxhole with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I would actually put Potomac somewhere, right? Because Giselle, she's sneaky. She's sneaky. Karen will look you in the eye and she will say to you, this is what happened, even if it didn't, but she will go down on the sword. And I guess if to spice things up, because what happens if like someone just doesn't want to participate? I really think that any Housewives would be great. Any Housewives season, any cast would be great put up against Basketball Wives.
Ooh.
Now, if you don't watch Basketball Wives, let me hip you to it. We have Shawnee O'Neal, the former wife of Shaq. We have a few other people on the cast, but most importantly, we have Tammy Roman. And Tammy was on one of the first seasons of Real World, and then it went to Road Rules. I just feel like we need to have Basketball Wives in there for legitimacy, because then the competition can get really dicey.
I didn't realize we could go outside franchise.
We can't, but we can do whatever we want.
Well, I suppose that Potomac pick is interesting, right? Because Robin Dixon has to have had picked up some basketball moves at this point after all of her years with Juan, but not with Juan.
Good point. So I guess we're not going with Real Housewives of Orange County.
Well, or with Basketball Wives.
I mean, Basketball Wives are the most They probably have the most skills to bear.
I think so. That would be formidable competition.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I went outside the boundaries of the questions, but, at this point we don't have money to pay anyone for their being on our imaginary show. So
this is fantasy real world road rules, so, you can do whatever you want.
So does that conclude Bongo?
Yeah, our Bongo party was concluded.
Yay.
Woo, Bongo party! So we spoke a little bit about Catherine Dennis as being one of the several great-granddaughters of John C. Calhoun, and kind of the legacy that obviously leaves. But Catherine Dennis came on the show the first season as kind of more of a minor character. She was younger than everybody else. The men were all kind of fawning over her, so much controversy, and she ended up with Thomas Ravenel, and they have been on again, off again. She's had 2 children by him. Thomas and Catherine have been going through years now of court orders and court appearances, trying to figure out their parenting and visitation agreements, which is looking pretty dicey for Thomas right now because of the allegations he's facing for sexual assault. But Catherine, for a while, had hardly any visitation rights because she tested positive for marijuana. And so Thomas ended up taking the kids away from her. And so these seasons have kind of been tracking this tumultuous relationship. And really, it's kind of in a lot of ways become a show about how the rest of the cast is relating to Thomas and Catherine's struggle, right? And the ways in which Catherine has had this uphill battle in terms of people's perception in Charleston about kind of how do I say, like a soiled woman, or you know what I mean, like that they're treating her like she's not really a lady, right? And how that
a woman of ill repute.
Yes, a woman of ill repute, so to speak. And so this is our first season right now without Thomas Ravenel. Bravo's cut him from the cast because of all of his legal issues. Yet it's interesting that the idea of Thomas, right, and Thomas still being peripheral in these people's lives is still affecting the show in a lot of ways. So with that background, contemporary information on Catherine Dennis, I think this is the perfect time to go to Jessica for today's Historians on Housewives lesson.
Okay, so I think that Southern Charm provides the perfect opportunity for learning how to do family history. I kid you not. That is because, like we have said, 3 cast members come from very wealthy and famous families. So today I want to talk a little bit about Catherine. We've already talked about her great, a few times great grandfather, John C. Calhoun. Because Calhoun was so famous, he left written records. Most of us don't have family members that left written records, but we will use the Calhoun family as a way to show you how you could actually do some kind of research. First of all, let me say that every document, everything you find, every scrap that you think that might not be important, all weaves together in a particular way. So just because you don't think you have enough on your family, don't believe that. Don't believe that. So, for example, John C. Calhoun was a very skilled orator, and he gave a speech in 1840 in the U.S. Senate called On the Slavery Question. And here he states, on the contrary, the Southern situation regards the relation as one which cannot be destroyed without subjecting the 2 races to the greatest calamity, and the section to poverty. desolation and wretchedness. In this conversation, this is me now, not him talking, he's talking about what would happen if slavery were to be eradicated from the South. And he's inherently saying that the African American community could not provide for themselves, but this would also rip apart the Southern economy. How does this link to family history? Well, actually, it shows us in some ways what some elite people might be thinking at the time. This will send us on kind of a paper trail to look at maybe letters that Calhoun has written. I'm getting the look from the producer. Am I getting the look? Oh,
No.
Maybe letters he has written. It's easier to do family history on famous people, right? For example, you can just do a quick Google search, and we would be able to look at an 1840 census to see who was in John Calhoun's family. There's his wife, there's extensive children. And also by 1850, if we look at the U.S. Census record, we can see how many people he owned, okay? And the U.S. Census records are very easy to find. Many people think you only need to go through Ancestry.com, but in fact, you can find them at any of your local libraries. You can find them at any universities, and in some cases, there's online databases for U.S. Census material. There's all kinds of little family history facts that I would love to tell you about, but you can find out more about Catherine Dennis's family history in particular by visiting our Patreon account and following us on Twitter, where we will be speaking more about family history in a big kind of way. And most importantly, if you're interested in your own family history, you should check out our website, Historians on Housewives, because we do give free family history consultations.
Now, isn't it true, Jessica, that you could just go to one of the National Archives and look up information on a relative, depending on which location you're at and what it is that they house?
You can. In fact, for example, let's talk about where I'm most familiar, Washington, D.C. and Maryland. You can go into the National Archives, either in D.C. or in Maryland, and you could, if you knew the year your ancestor lived, if you know the county that they lived in, you can just search for them in a database. The other thing you can do, which people don't realize, is if you know the state they were born in, you can also go to the state archives and pay someone to do a search on your ancestor. I mean, so for example, you can't find anyone who's presently living, right? You can't find anyone who's presently living because there's privacy clauses and what have you. But, for example, in the state of Maryland, if you knew that your family member lived in 1850, you go to the Maryland State Archives. Shout out to them. They were invaluable in helping me write my first book. You can go to the Maryland State Archives, and for a fee, they will look up what they can find on your ancestor. I think what people misunderstand about doing family history is that the librarians, the people at family history libraries, they're there to help you. They are so excited when you find whoever you're looking for. So, I guess what we would say is people shouldn't be afraid of the word archive when you're thinking about family history. It's not as overwhelming as you would think. In some ways, it can be very, very rewarding. But I will step off my soapbox for a minute so we can get back to the actual show at hand.
Is there anything else you wanted to say about Catherine Dennis?
No. But then, yes, I think we'll be coming back to her. I just scratched the surface in terms of what we can learn about Calhoun by looking at his speeches and census records. There's all kinds of things we can explore. I found, for example, his will and his wife's will on the internet. We can go closer to Catherine Dennis and look at some of her ancestors in the 20th century. So this will kind of be an ongoing thread. I want to roll it out slowly so that our listeners don't feel overwhelmed.
So we've talked about speeches and census records for Catherine Dennis, but if we switch to a cast member like, say, Shep Rose, does that offer us a different kind of set of documents to talk about in terms of putting together a family history?
It does and it doesn't. So Shep Rose is like Catherine Dennis. There's been information written on his family. So, for example, he is the descendant of the Boykin family.
My name is Shepard Rose, and I'm from Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. I come from an old South Carolina family called the Boykin family. In the 1700s, my family founded the town of Boykin, South Carolina. So they've been around since the beginning of the country.
Oh! Yeehaw! Chester's dead!
The state dog of South Carolina is named after my family, the Boykin Spaniel.
And they were major landholders and founders of the town Boykin, South Carolina. In our peripheral research, our preliminary research, we found that a member of the Boykin family created a website with documents belonging to the Boykin family, including wills and inventories, where we learned not just about the particular family member, but again, we could see inventories for the enslaved people that they owned. And Max, you looked at some of those documents. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you would want to shed light on?
The first thing that comes to mind is, two things. One, the Boykin family themselves invented the Boykin Spaniel. That's
interesting.
That's how prominent they are. That there's a dog named after them.
Wow.
Yeah. What I learned from looking through the extensive slave holdings that were on the site was that the Boykins were part of the internal slave trade, a massive forced migration of enslaved people from the Upper South, so Maryland, Virginia, South Carolina, to the Cotton Belt or the Deep South, states like Alabama, Arkansas, Texas, were all places where planters forcibly moved enslaved people to work on massive cotton plantations that literally was spun into gold by the mill factories in the North.
Fortunately, or unfortunately, however you want to look at it, again, there are many documents on the Boykin family. One of the key documents is a diary. Mary Boykin Chestnut, not Boykin. Mary Boykin Chestnut kept a diary, and this is a very well-known diary. And in this diary, we learn about her life during the Civil War. We learned about the people that she enslaved. And there are so many other things we learn about Southern culture we would not have if we didn't have her diary. So in addition to census records, wills, and inventories, some prominent people often wrote diaries. Now, when we start dealing with people who weren't literate, it gets a little tricky. But we should also say that some people in some church denominations might have left oral histories where someone would ask them questions and someone would transcribe it, or when we have voice recordings, they would record, basically an interview. But if we were to review the documents today, we've looked at census records, we've looked at speeches, we've looked at wills and inventories, and then diaries. Those are 5 good places to start if people wanted to do their own family history.
I also feel like we should note that the Boykin family website was an incredibly robust website that the family themselves put together, but it's recently not working anymore. Like, you get an oops if you try to navigate to the Boykin family webpage. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that comes back online at some point, because it was a really, really rich, robust source for looking at Shep's family and really kind of histories of slavery within that family.
Mm-hmm. One of the great things about these kind of websites, one of the great things about these kinds of websites is that family members can find one another. If you do some of the big search engines and pay money to some of the big family history corporations, they have internal chats where people who might be looking for the Callahans of California can connect with people who are also a Callahan who might be in Washington, D.C. So I see that the Boykin website is similar to a lot of other places where people are finding their own way to connect.
The really detailed records they kept about all the people that they enslaved, that, in the research of looking at these family histories for Southern Charmed and, the recent happenings on the Real Housewives of Potomac, it was so glaringly obvious, right, that Southern Charm is this very white show, right? These descendants of slave holders, right? That the wealth, that the space they're in, right, was only made possible through slavery, right? But that is never really discussed on the show, right? I think as close as we get is Thomas's dad staring down the cameraman saying, I don't like Lincoln, right? And that's why he's giving his $5s away as tips.
You got like $5 to leave her a tip? I like to get rid of those because there's old Lincoln. You don't like Lincoln? Oh, Lord.
Right. And so when you have this kind of juxtaposition between Southern charm, and it's, it's airing in the same cycle as Potomac, right? As Giselle is trying to locate, her family history at a plantation in Louisiana, right? What a disconnect that is, right? And the way in which I think that it's, in some ways, Southern Charm has become such a popular celebratory show, but how problematic that is, right? When you still have people right now who have such trouble, actually tracing their lineage because, the institution of slavery has ripple effects through the generations, both in terms of African Americans themselves, but also, right, the wealth that is on Southern Charm is still, a direct line back to.
Well, I think in some ways that's the point of Southern Charm, right? It follows this idyllic tradition of Southerners being Southerners, and slavery, again, is in the background, or the workers are in the background. One thing I will say is that I appreciate about the episode of Potomac when Giselle went to the Whitney plantation and when she connected with her family members at a party for her father is that we actually see a black family, right? We see a woman doing the work of keeping contact with all her aunties and her grandmothers and what have you. And also they take this moving trip to the Whitney plantation. Because we are getting more advanced in how we do history, it is possible to trace African-American lineage in a way that we haven't been able to trace before. And that's not just to say that, many people think that if you do a DNA test, that'll tell you who you are. I often advocate that people do exactly what Giselle did. You go, you get on the ground, you walk around where your family lived, you tell stories, you trade stories with other members of the community. And, it just so happened that her family had a link to that particular plantation. And we happen to know about it because of her platform on the Housewives. But if other people went and wanted to engage in the work of walking around where their family came from, they'd be amazed how many details would just kind of fall into their lap. Not everyone wants to do that, okay? Not everyone wants to do that. Not everyone knows that they can do that. But we're kind of in this moment where more and more is becoming possible. So I appreciate the fact that Southern Charm is airing right at the time we have Potomac Housewives.
It's like seeing both sides of that story in a lot of ways.
It really is.
On both sides of historical memory, really. When they, I think it was in their opening in their first season, Southern Charm played Who Would You Rather Date, Scarlett or who was the other plantation mistress on Go?
Mellie?
Yeah.
Mellie? I'm so embarrassed that I know that. Gone with the Wind?
Yeah.
It was Scarlett and it was Miss Mellie.
Yeah. And they asked
Ashley
Tom.
Wilkes.
Oh, it might
Ashley Wilkes was the husband of Mellie. That I know that. I need to be embarrassed.
A little bit. But they were asking Thomas, who would he rather date, Melanie or Scarlett? Is he more of a Scarlett man or a Melanie man?
Guys, I have a Gone with the Wind question for you. What do you think would be a better match for Thomas? A Scarlett or a Melanie?
Who's Melanie?
Melanie was Ashley Wilkes' wife. Well, Scarlett was the bold. She went after what she wanted. She had chutzpah. She wasn't...
Ran through husbands like water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Melanie was more the reserved, subdued.
Yeah, she gets run over.
Scarlett.
Why just choose one?
Melanie, I go like this. Boom. That's Melanie. Boom. Scarlett. Boom. But the real question is, would you want a red or Ashley?
A little bit of both, I think.
A little bit of both. Ashley's just a big pussy. I mean, come on, he's a wussy. Why would Scarlett go for that wimp?
Maybe because he was stable.
Yeah, but he still didn't go for what he wanted.
When the world's turned upside down, people like Ashley Wilkes go straight to the bottom, okay? And people like Rhett Butler, people like this guy, people like me, we get straight to the top.
Oh.
Now, who do you want?
I'm glad I'm on the right side of that one.
I'm definitely a Rhett. Isn't that obvious?
Yeah, and I think that just really underscores, like, how even this historical memory can get used to
continue to inform reality TV, continue to inform...
I mean, it does inform reality TV. It also, if you're only watching Southern Charm and not Potomac, for instance, you get a very different view of what the antebellum South looked like for the people living in it. You get this idyllic, Hollywood-produced view of...
the Southern masculinity, Southern femininity that we opened up with.
Yeah, the romance of the South, the Old South. And with Giselle's story, it becomes much more untenable to keep that idyllic view of the South intact, at the very least.
Can we go before? I would like to talk a little bit about Thomas's family history, but I'd also like to pause, and not literally pause, just pause for your editing. I would like to take this moment to talk about this tweet that we responded to within this week. Someone spoke about the South rising again. And can we talk about that for a moment? Yeah. That really got under some people's skin, positively and negatively.
A person on Twitter, a fan of The Real Housewives of Dallas, said, "Thank you, Jesus. The South has risen again on the Bravo TV app. It's getting close."
Now, I guess that when you think about the South rising again, it's going to have at least two different responses. I could see where some Southerners think this is great. For African Americans like myself or people on the left side of history, I can imagine that was a harrowing tweet. And so our hive mind, our Twitstorians, if you will, composed a tweet in response. And it was, drumroll.
This tweet is more problematic than you'll ever know, but we do need a new season of Real Housewives of Dallas. And I will say, Leanne Locken liked that tweet. She liked both tweets. And so it is problematic nevertheless. I think that, like, she liked the initial tweet, but
I'm sure that I couldn't imagine Leanne liking our tweet had she not been on board with, like, oh, it's really problematic to say the South will rise again. I think if I'm going to give her the benefit of the doubt, I think that she was liking the fact that this person was like, Dallas is coming back.
Right.
Right. But, like, I don't think that she could have liked our tweet if she was like, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with the South rising again. Right. Because that was, like, the crux of the tweet that Max issued in response, right? That, like, yes, of course, we're ready for a new season of Dallas, but you know, this myth of the South rising again, right, is really problematic and something that a lot of people just don't let go of. And you gave some good hashtags to that. What did you include?
Lost cause myth. Bravo.
Yeah, but it was that lost cause myth, right? That I mean, I had a colleague who shared with me that, you know, less than 10 years ago, she was taught, you know, in her home state, North Carolina, or maybe a little bit more than 10 years now, but, you know, very contemporary, right? In the 90s, she was taught that the Civil War was a war of Northern aggression in her North Carolina school system, right? Which is incredible to think about, right? These narratives of Southern chivalry and the South that remains almost unshakable to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of these narratives that are unshakable, can we turn back to Southern quote-unquote gentility and talk about Thomas Ravenel?
I would love to talk about Thomas Ravenel.
Your intro game is, like, to a new segment is on point, I need to say. That, like, transition was
Hashtag all those years watching Harvey and Charles. Hashtag I learned from TMZ. So Ravenel's wealth, his family wealth, comes from the steel business. His 19th century family wealth. But his family's history spans centuries in South Carolina. His family was also into politics. So if we go back to family history, we can read speeches made by his father, Arthur Ravenel. And like the Calhouns and the Boykins, we can trace Thomas's family in the census. But what I think Max and I found both very interesting as we were doing this research on Thomas is that he presently owns Brooklyn Farm.
Mm-hmm.
And that used to be a slave plantation, not necessarily a slave plantation that his family owned, but the fact that he owns it now and it's been restored. I wonder, what do we mean when we say things have been restored? Has it been restored just the house?
And at one point, he lived with Catherine at that plantation. And that was a whole point of contention, right? Because Ashley, Thomas's newest girlfriend, at points got to go on like romantic weekends with him to the plantation, right? So not only is it a restored plantation, but the plantation itself is used as this space of like Southern family and romance and wooing.
Well, you know, that's a big thing in the South is you can get married on a plantation. There are plantation marriage packages.
Oh, my God.
That, you know, I mean, I'm not from the South, so that's all I have is I won't be getting married there. But I think that in terms of like just looking at architecture and public records about land, that also can be a way that you can piece together a family history. So when we looked at this farm, this quote-unquote farm, and its history is changed ownership many, many times. But we were able to look at records, land records, and see who might have owned the farm, you know, for example, in the 19th century. So just staying on theme, there's many ways that you could put your family's history together.
In terms of Brooklyn Farm, can I also mention in terms of Brooklyn Farm that is also the site of Thomas's polo matches. And I think that it's important, right, that not only does the plantation then function as a place of romance and wooing and the family hub, but again, it's this kind of space for genteel white Southern men to express their gentility, right, and to have people watch them in that expression.
The performance of this genteel lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you think of any examples when Southern gentility was enacted during one of these polo matches?
Well, it's like, you know, in the last season, the polo match, right? The men are, you know, coming to Thomas and making sure that Thomas thinks through his relationship with Ashley, right? Will Ashley be the appropriate girlfriend, right? Or the long-term partner, right? For a man of his status in the South, right? Which is inherently, right, this act of gentility and thinking about how to maintain that kind of stature, right? And it's this kind of push-pull where it's like he's kind of trying to break up with her at the end of the polo match and everyone's left the plantation and they're inside the house at that point. And she's like, but I'm not giving up yet, Thomas, right? And he's like clearly like, oh, it doesn't really work because I was going to try to duck out right now. But, you know, and Thomas has never been great at breaking up and getting back together with girlfriends in general. But it really was this moment that displayed that in some ways these relationships on Southern Charm are also about a community relationship, right? That the intimacy of a partner relationship actually affects the larger community as far as they're concerned because of the power and the privilege that they all share.
Mm-hmm.
So Arthur Ravenel was a state senator in South Carolina, and he believed in 2000 that the Confederate flag should continue to fly over the State House. And he was interviewed about this, and he was trying to defend himself as saying, well, I'm not racist, because he said, quote, I sit next to or I work next to, quote, a very fine black senator. But then he referred to the NAACP, who was leading the campaign to remove the flag from the State House, as, quote, the National Association of Retarded People. And that resulted in a major controversy. And so he ended up deciding he should issue an apology, but not to the NAACP. He apologized to, quote, retarded people for mistakenly associating them with the NAACP.
Great guy.
So did his apology need an apology? So he thought he was doing something better by still labeling people who were challenged in a different way as retarded?
I think he kind of left it at that, to be like, oh, I didn't mean to assault you, community, right? He was really, it was like this way of pivoting. Like, I really meant this against the NAACP. I shouldn't have slandered you people with like mental disabilities in the process.
Right, but slamming groups that are progressive for African American rights is still fine to do. With that note, I want to talk about, we know that the flag eventually, the Confederate flag eventually came down in South Carolina only because Bree Newsom, an African American woman active in Black Lives Matter, climbed up the flagpole and removed it. And of course, this created a lot of controversy. But what that did then do is create a domino effect where we see these bastions of Confederate legacies kind of toppling. We're right in a movement now where people are removing monuments to Confederate soldiers and Confederate war heroes. To tie this back in, as I was doing research on John C. Calhoun, I was able to find actually a lot more information than I even knew as someone who teaches 19th century history, because Yale University had a series of meetings to decide whether or not they should remove his statue from campus. So we're in this moment where the American memory is kind of being changed right in front of our eyes.
And the cast of Southern Charm.
Is
directly in the middle of that.
Well, and it's interesting because when John McCain was still alive in 2000, right, he played this in a really interesting way that really gets to this issue of historical memory, but also about, political expediency based on which part of the country you're in and talking to, right? At first, he didn't really want to take a stance on Arthur Ravenel, and then he went to say, oh, this is offensive, right? It's a symbol of racism and slavery. And then he realized that South Carolina's primary was critical, and he flipped and he goes, well, the flag is really a symbol of heritage, right? And so playing both sides of that game, right? That how can it, the symbol of heritage on one side, right? But offensive racism and slavery on the other, that these things really don't coexist together, right? You can't have both at the same time, right? Because you're creating inherently violent spaces.
Right, and that's what I think that some people don't understand, that these kind of iconic artifacts, if you will, can have multiple meanings, and they do in fact have multiple meanings.
But I think within those multiple meanings, right, then you have to make really thoughtful decisions about how these things with multiple meanings will be displayed within a community, right? Like what their position within a community should be, right? And what does it mean if it's still front and center
You know, it's a good example for that, and a good example about what memory and in this conversation, slavery and African Americans, how they should be portrayed. We forgot to talk about the very controversial Ancestry.com commercial. I don't know if we want to finish on Thomas.
I feel like wrapping up with this Ancestry commercial that was pulled is really important, because I feel like it pulls together these strands that we're discussing when it comes to slavery in the South that we see with Potomac and Southern Charm.
So several weeks ago, Ancestry.com, it might have been several months ago, at some point it's summer, classes aren't in, time doesn't have any meaning right now. But Ancestry.com ran an ad trying to hearken to African Americans to, patronize Ancestry.com, learn about their own family history. The problem was it features an African American woman who is this correct, owned by a white slaveholder? Am I making this up?
No.
And what was their relationship?
Well, it wasn't the slaveholder. We don't know their relationship, but that was probably awful, right?
Okay.
She was running away with a white gentleman who's going to help her get north.
But Ancestry wouldn't comment on whether or not this was an actual real person and a real story. Right? Their answers to that were really, really vague. So it was really left unclear if this potential lover, as they were trying to paint him out in the commercial, was an owner or was not an owner. Either way, it's really problematic.
And it's problematic for a lot of reasons. It's problematic because it insinuates that the only kind of relationships that black women could have under slavery were with these gallant white men who would, quote unquote, help them to freedom, as if enslaved people weren't trying to orchestrate their own freedom. It was problematic on so many levels, but Ancestry.com, you're right, they did not talk about, in some ways, the very the racialized dynamics that are going on in this conversation. And many people said, why can't she be running away with an African American man? Mm-hmm. Why does it have to be this trope of a great white savior?
Or that when African Americans go to these sites like Ancestry.com, they're going to find these triumphant stories. And so often with these types of the sources that are left, wills, runaway advertisements, sale advertisements, there is a lot of trauma for African Americans going back to that past, and to treat it as though it is something that is,
idyllic,
right? To go back to this theme of Gone with the Wind, that there can be this idyllic slave narrative almost.
Right. I think this is an important part, and we can bring all of this together. Gone with the Wind is this, we only see the perspective of the whites whose civilization was destroyed by northern aggression. Whereas when we juxtapose that with the Ancestry.com experience or narrative, we're still not really seeing the totality of the enslaved experience. Max has a good point. When African Americans go to do family history, it is often traumatic. Traumatic because there's the weight of slavery, there's the weight of the diaspora, just in trying to understand their ancestors' experiences. They might hit a lot of roadblocks because, people were property, and they might not necessarily have the same name if they were sold from place to place. So there's so much trauma in doing African American history. But as I tell my students, I say that African American history is hard, it is traumatic, but every once in a while it is soul defining. It is soul defining. I wouldn't always say triumphant, because that's saying that there's going to be this happy ending, but it is soul defining. It speaks to people on a lot of registers. And so I guess my other caveat, if Ancestry hired me, as I've been trying to get them to do for a long time. If Ancestry hired me, the story would play out differently, because often when you go to archives, if you go to the Family History Library in Salt Lake City, Utah, I've been places where I've heard genealogists and librarians tell people that they can't find their ancestors, their enslaved ancestors. And that's really not true. That's really not true. Again, we become more sophisticated in how we tell the story. So I guess what I would say about the commercial is because we become more sophisticated in how to tell the story and how to get the information, it would be necessary that the commercial itself would reflect more about what it is like to do African American history.
Well, an interesting thing that Ancestry did to try to defend themselves with this commercial was say, oh, well, it was meant to air in Canada, right? That, like,
as if there wasn't slavery in Canada.
Well, that, and also as if almost this unspoken acknowledgement that, yeah, that would be horrible for it to air in America, right? But so it's like almost this acknowledgement while not acknowledging that the commercial was problematic to begin with.
Yeah, I can't save them on that one. I will say that just hashtag Afua Cooper's work, The Hanging of Angelique, that actually talks about a slave woman who allegedly was running away with a white man. And, well, you know, they burned down Montreal. So I'm just saying that sometimes that's also how the story ends.
Romantic ending. And now it's time for the Coffee Clatch.
So the Coffee Clatch is our segment where the historians on Housewives advertise for scholars, academic publishers. We'll be able to talk about people who are going to come on to future podcast episodes, and we'll give updates to our edited volume in the works. If you want to participate in any of the many goings-on with the historians on Housewives, you can find us at our website, historiansonhousewives.com. You can submit to be a part of our edited volume or to be on a podcast. Maybe you want to write a blog or an op-ed for us. And you can find all of those submissions on our website. You can also find our swag on our website. And who doesn't like swag?
We have hats. We have baseball jerseys, long sleeve. We have women T-shirts, T-shirts for women that are much more flattering. We have T-shirts for little children. We even have shirts for your dog, man's best friend.
Mm-hmm. And even maternity shirts.
And maternity shirts.
So there is really something for everybody. We have mugs.
We are scholars, so there's quite a few coffee mugs.
Tote bags, aprons. Like, if you can think of it, we can make it. You can also follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @historiansH, and we typically tweet episodes live, bringing up historical questions and featuring historical works that are connecting to the issues on Bravo programming. So in lieu of actual advertisements, today I'll say we have some really exciting episodes coming up featuring Tanisha Ford, Takia Hamilton, Don Durante, along with many, many other scholars. A big thank you to Dr. Joaquin Galarza for writing our intro music. Doctors Mark and Barbara Spear for being our first fans. Thomas McKenzie and others at the Faculty Center at Saddleback Community College who have helped us book recording space and answered all of our questions on how to do this. Ashley Ashe. And finally, this podcast was recorded at Saddleback's Faculty Center. And so just the hugest shout out to Saddleback College and all the support that we've received from the students, faculty, and staff. We couldn't thank you guys enough for all of that support.